When we look at oligopoly, we see that there could be a collusive behavior or a non-collusive behavior. In a collusive behavior, the monopoly will be acting like a cartel and they can act together to set the price or the quantity or anything else to make them become more profitable. However, when we look at non-collusive case, this is when the oligopoly is competing in order to gain more market share. One such theory of non-collusive oligopoly is the Kinked Demand Curve, which is devised in 1930s by an American economist called Paul Sweezy. Although the theory has been called into question, it does provoke some interesting thoughts about the non-collusive behavior of an oligopoly. The theory assumes that, let's say there is a particular price at which the firm is operating, then the firm will have a very elastic demand above that price and inelastic demand below that price. So if I show that through diagram, let's say currently we have a price which is P naught, and the theory says this, that above this price P naught, the firm will have an elastic demand, which means this demand curve will cease to exist after this point A, while after price P naught or below price P naught, we will have an inelastic demand, which means prior to P naught, this demand curve will not be existing, and that's why I'm making a dotted demand curve. Now, why is that so? Let's talk about this. According to the theory, it says that if the firm raises its price above P naught, then it is unlikely that its competitors would raise their price, and so a lot of demand would be lost to the other firms. Why? Because if you raise your price and let's say there is interdependence and your competitor doesn't really also increase the price, then you will lose the market to them. This means that above P naught, when you raise the price above P naught, demand will be relatively elastic, since a small increase in price will lead to a large fall in quantity demanded if you do increase your price. Now, what will happen if you decrease the price? Well, if the firm were to lower its price, then it is likely that the competitors would follow. So any price below P naught, the competitors will also follow. Why? Because they don't want to lose any sales. So it is likely they would also sort of lower their price in order to regain any lost sales that must have happened because of you lowering your price. So when the firm lower the price, the competitors follow suit. When the firm increases the price, the competitors will not follow suit. So when you lower your price, as a result of that, your market share will not change. So a decrease in price is unlikely to lead to any change or increase in quantity demanded, and that explains the demand curve will be relatively inelastic. So this is what the theory says, that because you have two kinds of behavior to be seen. When you increase price, the competitor is not going to follow your move, but when you decrease price, he will follow your suit, or the firm will follow your suit, which makes the demand curve to be a kinked demand curve around point A. It will now also have an MR, which is going to be also elastic for this part of the demand curve and inelastic for this part of the demand curve. So let's draw that. So for the elastic demand curve, I will have a elastic MR, so that my MR will look like this. But for my inelastic demand curve, I will have an MR that will look like this. And if you look at the demand curve, I can call my demand curve to be XAD. So let's write this. And the MR curve will be X, let's call this Y, Z, and MR. So let's call X, Y, Z, and MR. Now, this theory therefore implies that if you now draw the cost curve, so let's draw a cost curve. Let's say my cost curve is MC naught. Then clearly MC equals to MR now will happen at this point, which means the price will be P naught, quantity will be Q naught. And even though the firm see an increase in cost, let's say marginal cost goes from MC naught to MC1, we will not see any change in the price or quantity, and the reason is simply because as long as the marginal cost is between this zone Y, Z, the MC equals to MR happens at that point, where it is elastic, and as a result of this, you will not see any change in price and quantity. Only if there's a very high change in cost, for example, if the marginal cost becomes, for example, MC sort of 2, or let's say the marginal cost becomes, for example, MC3, you will see a change in the price or quantity. Otherwise, the MC equals to MR will lead to the same price P naught and the same quantity Q naught. And this suggests to us that despite the changes in cost, there will be what we call price rigidity in this market structure. This is very unique of oligopoly, that in oligopoly there will be price rigidity or price stickiness because of the fact that the firms are reluctant to change price. So we can sort of identify 3 reasons or recap 3 reasons of this price rigidity. Number one, firms are afraid to raise prices above the current market price because other firms will not follow, and so they will lose trade sales and probably profit. So any price increase is not matched by the competitor because you will lose your sales. Secondly, firms are also afraid to lower their price below the market price because other firms will follow, undercutting them, and so this can also end up creating a price war that may harm all the firms involved. So, firms may be reluctant to also even lower the price because they don't want to get into an unnecessary price war. And lastly, we saw the shape of the MR curve was such that if the marginal cost was to rise in the zone, then it is possible that the MC would still equal to MR, and so the firms will, being profit maximizer, will not change their prices because it is within that zone where MR was completely vertical. The King demand curve therefore makes some really important predictions. Number one is that businesses might be reaching a stable profit maximizing equilibrium at that price P naught and Q naught that we talked about. Let me go back to the diagram and show you guys this P naught and Q naught. This will be what we call a stable price with little incentive to change the price. Now, second important sort of conclusion we make, which is also seen in oligopoly, is because of this price stability or rigidity that we see, firms then have to rely on something called non-price competition for gaining market share, such as advertising or after sales service or any such thing like branding, which can result in them to gain market share without competing on prices. So firms are reluctant to compete on price, but they are more keen to do what we call advertising and other non-price competition to gain market share. There are some criticisms of the King demand curve. The first one, which we can completely see here, is this, that it fails to explain how the firm determines the original price P naught and quantity Q naught to begin with. In a way, this theory could kind of work backwards and say that if the price is P naught and Q naught is the quantity, then this is what the behavior will look like for an oligopoly, which seems kind of unrealistic when it comes to real life, that we know the price and quantity from before. Nonetheless, what we can see is that King demand curve theory does explain to us a couple of concepts. Number one is that it tells us the price rigidity, which is normally seen in oligopoly, and it also tells us the non-price competition that is also commonly found in oligopolies because of the price rigidity that takes place.